Hey everybody, in this video we're going to be showing you a great method of painting spaceship corridor walls for Warhammer 40,000 by Games Workshop, although all the methods and techniques that we're going to be showing you here can be applied to any sort of science fiction scenery you might want to paint for any kind of game. We're going for a very dark and gloomy atmosphere for this sort of thing, but also going to add in a cool effect such as like a flashing light on there. We hope you enjoy it and we'll see you at the desk. When it comes to painting scenery like these spaceship corridor walls, the best undercoat to use by far is going to be a black one. So in this case, I've used some Chaos Black spray from Citadel. And the reason for this is these walls have a lot of texture on them. So when you're painting them, it's very easy to miss some corners. And so if they're black, it'll just look like shading. And also, it's going to lean into the sort of moody atmosphere that we want to go for here. So it's the perfect starting point. Now the first colour I'm going to use is going to be some Dark Reaper. And to apply it, what I've got is a large dry brush here from Citadel. And what I'm going to do here for the base coat is sort of like a hybrid between base coating and dry brushing, sort of both at the same time. So a very, very heavy dry brush really. So I'm going to get some on the brush and just get it onto the palette like we normally do to draw from, just to control exactly how much is on there. But what I'm going to do is just start out by just removing a little bit of it, so not loads, there's still plenty on there. And to apply it onto the wall, what I'm going to do is go straight at it and apply it in quite a rough motion like this in a circular way, just building it up like this, because this leaves some of that black still in the deepest corners, giving us that shading, but you can see also it gets us that nice bluish tone that we want straight away. So all you got to do is all this across the walls, and I recommend doing it twice just to ensure the blue's built up as you go along. I've finished applying that first coat, and you can see just what I mean about having that black undercoat in the corners now. If you look at areas like down there, and in this corner especially, you can see some of that black undercoat still visible, but it works as some shading here, so it's great for adding some depth to this scenery. And with that done, what we're now going to do is start breaking it up by introducing another colour into it, which is going to be silver. And here, any sort of dark silver will do, but I'm going to use some Surcoat silver, and to apply it, you want to go for a larger brush for it, because we're painting some quite large areas. For that reason, I'm using a monster brush here from the Army Painter. Now with this, what you want to do is make sure you thin it on your palette so that you have the control over it, because we do want some neatness here, because what we want to do is essentially break up the quite monotonous colour right now, which I'm just picking out some features and things. I'm looking for technical things. Things such as, for example, this air vent that we've got just here. All you've got to do is block it in entirely. And as I say, it's really up to you exactly how much you do here, but just look for little technical details. So areas like that, there's a little control box hidden away inside here, which we can paint silver. These little dials perhaps, even the top of the wall. The choice really is yours, but just carry on until you're happy. And here we are, I finished picking out silver details, and you can see I've done it on both sides just there. And with that done, what we can now do is move on to picking out a few more details before we put any wash onto the scenery. And what we want to do first of all is add a bit of off black here for cables and things. And for this, what I'm going to use is some Death Reaper. With that done, there are of course some skulls on here because this is Warhammer scenery, so what we'll need now is some Dragon Fang to pick that out. We're going to start out with some Death Reaper, and for this I've gone for a regular brush. I've got size 1 here from Artsopus, so if you want to go for a Citadel one, you're looking at about a medium layer, something with a bit more control because these details are much smaller now. What we're looking for are features just to pick out with this colour that are things like cables, so rubber pipes, that kind of thing. So for example, you can see we've got 2 just here. All we want to do is just carefully move in and block these out at this stage. And once that's done, we can then move on to some Dragon Fang, and this is again using that size 1 brush. We just want to carefully look around the scenery and spot any skull that we can find and just gently block it in. All those base colours have now been applied, even on the skulls that are quite hidden away, so just those 2 just in there. And with that done, we can now put a wash on the scenery, and what we need here is a brown wash for a sort of dirty, earthy kind of feel to things. And for this, what I'm going to use is some Battlemud Wash, though any sort of brown wash will do, and we're going to be applying quite a lot of it. So if you haven't already, definitely put down something to protect your work surface, because inevitably some of this wash is going to drip off the pieces of scenery. Now the brush we need to apply it needs to be a big one, so I'm back to using that large dry brush here from Citadel, and I've got some of the wash on my palette. You can thin this with a little bit of water to make it go a bit further if you want to, but just be careful not to overdo it because you don't want to lose the strength of the paint. I'm going to just get a bit of water on there just to help thin it a little bit though, just to make it go a bit further, and it's a matter of just mixing it in so you get that nicely mixed together, and loading up with a really generous amount on your brush, and all you got to do is paint this all over your scenery. So just apply it all the way over, making sure to work it into all the nooks and crannies as you go along, and once you got it on here, give it plenty of time to dry. It's going to need at least an hour before you can move on to the next stage. Once that wash is dry, we then come up to an optional step, which is to do a second coat of the wash, but this time rather than putting it over everything, instead just focus it towards the bottom of each wall. So this sort of area here to make it a bit darker than the parts above it. Now what this does is helps blend the board into the actual baseboard that you're playing on, so it helps blend the scenery together and just really helps it be a bit more embedded into the ground, though whether you do it or not is of course entirely up to you. The wash is dry and you can see it's given a really nice grimy appearance to things, and so with that done, what we can now do is begin highlighting it. And to do this, what we want to do is take a look at those bluish walls first of all. And this is going to be dry brushing with two colours, first of all by going back to Dark Reaper, but then going a little bit lighter and using some Thunderhawk blue. But first of all we need some Dark Reaper, and to apply it I've gone for a slightly smaller dry brush this time. I've got a medium dry brush here from Citadel, and that's because on this we want to keep it onto the bluer parts of the walls, doing our best to avoid the silver and the bone where we can. So having a smaller brush really helps out with that. What we need to do is just get some of the bristles, then get some tissue paper and use it to work it into the brush whilst also removing the excess paint. And this time we want to go down to around about this point here, so you can see the sort of appearance I'm getting on the paper. And then we're just looking for those bluer parts of the walls, and it's just time to start applying it in a sort of circular motion. So if we start with this part here, which is nice and open, what we want to do is be fairly heavy, doing this rounding motion like this, just working our way down quicker than that original colour we put on, but not going quite all the way heavily down to the bottom. Instead, when you get to about this point here, so around about a centimetre from the bottom, instead just lightly flick it towards the bottom there. So you can see it remains going darker the further down we go. Now as we get to these more intricate parts, you can see how it's a little bit trickier. So as you're doing this, just take your time and avoid those other colours as best you can. Just gently working your way around, just aiming for those more open areas of blue. Once that's done, we can then move on to Thunderhawk Blue, and this time it's going to be a lighter dry brush across the whole thing. So again, just focus it a little bit lighter towards the top, a little bit heavier than you would be when you get further down. So this way we retain that depth as we go further down and it gets darker. Once again, just take your time and be as neat as you can around all these other colours, but if you catch them a little bit, don't worry, just try to keep it off as best you can. Once you finish that dry brushing with the blue, you can see now the edges are more defined, but we still got that nice grubby texture to it, so ideal for this sort of bit of scenery. And so now what we need to do is just quickly do a tiny bit of layering on the bone, just to make it a little bit lighter before we do one more dry brush, just to bring everything together. So here what we need is a medium bone colour, so I'm going to use some Skeleton Legion. I've gone for my size 1 brush once again, but you can go smaller if you want to. It depends what you're comfortable with. Basically just a brush with a good point on it is absolutely fine. And with it we need to just spot those skulls once again, and this time rather than painting the entire thing, we're looking for the parts that are more raised up and stand out. So on this one, for example, it means just doing a little bit on the forehead just there, a little bit around the eye socket, so just in there, a little bit around the nose, and then just pick out a few of the teeth. With that done, we can now move on to the dry brushing, which is going to be those last highlights on these pieces. And for this, what we need to do first of all is look at an optional one, which is going to be on the silver, because there's quite a bit of silver on here and you might want it to pop out a bit more. Now, if you do, what you'll need is some Necron compound for a dry brush. And then once that's done, what you'll definitely need, no matter whether you do that stage or not, is to go over the whole thing with a very light dry brush with a bone colour, which is going to give it an ever slightly dusty appearance, but also tie it all together and help those edges pop on all the details there. For this, what I'm going to be using is some Vampire Fang, but any sort of light bone colour will be ideal for that. But first of all, what we need is that Necron compound, and for this I'm going for a really small dry brush now, a small dry brush from Citadel, and a newer one at that, so the bristles are fairly well close together. That's because we need quite a bit of accuracy here, because we need to be careful about all those surrounding details, so be sure to set up for that. You just need to get a little bit on your brush, and rather than being quite heavy in preparing the paint this time, instead just do it on the side like this, because what this does is keeps those bristles together in a point. Still test it on the texture to see what you're getting. You want to really make sure there's not much left on there, but you can see how doing this is just helping keep them together, because as we apply it, what we need to do is take care to make sure not to catch details surrounding it. So for example, this fan just here, it means I can go at it in this sort of angle, lightly brushing, and this way you can see that highlight start to catch the edges. Now you certainly don't have to do all the silver if you're doing this step. Instead, just look for the ones that stand out more and the larger, more obvious ones. So the fan, for example, is great for this. These dials and things are good for it. Also, we've got the top of the roof. But if there are ones that are really hidden away and quite difficult to get to, don't worry about those. Just concentrate on these more obvious ones, really. And then finally, we need a very light bone colour. In this case, I'm using some Vampire Fang, and going for the large dry brush, all we've got to do is just very lightly dry brush it across the whole piece. So just using this light flicking motion, and what this will do is just tie everything together. Once you finish that dry brush, you could, if you want to, just leave the scenery there and it'll be a great backdrop for all of your games. But if you want to, you can add a little bit more detail to it, and that's what we're going to start doing now. Starting out with all the computer screens that appear on here. And on some of the pieces there are loads, on some there are just a few, but for all of these what we're going to go for is that classic sort of green screen. And to do this what we need is a dark green to get things going. I'm going to use some wyvern green for this and go for a small brush to apply it because some of these screens are very small. I've gone down to my size 00 here from Artis Opus. From Citadel I'd recommend going for a small layer. And with it, all you got to do is get the paint thinned and ready, and then it's time to start looking around, see as many screens as you can find. So for example, we've got this little round one just here. We just want to block all of the glass in at this stage. Once you finish the base coat, the next thing to do is to add some highlights in there to give the appearance of a reflection. And doing this is very much like painting lenses on things like Space Marine helmets or gems, that kind of thing. What you need now are some brighter greens. So we're going to start out with some Warpstone Glow, followed by a smaller amount of Moot Green, and then what we need is a pure white. So here I'm going to use some White Star. But first of all, what we need is Warpstone Glow, and to apply it, stick to your small brush because you're definitely going to need it for this part. What we want to do with this is essentially put in a fine line of this colour towards the lower left-hand side of each of these lenses. So in the case of the round ones, it's sort of like a crescent shape. For the squarer ones, it's those two corners. And to do it, just make sure you got that paint thin, so you've got the control over it, and then using the tip of the brush, just need to make sure you're nice and steady and go in for that area. So for this round one just here, for example, that means what we need to do is just apply this crescent shape in this sort of area here. So we're looking at just around there. And if you've got any more square ones, such as these ones around here, they're a bit funny shape with the dials at the bottom, but again, just want to apply it a bit on the left-hand side and then go down to the bottom of the screen, following those dials along. Next up we need a brighter green, so here I'm using some Moot Green and still using the same brush. What we need to do is carry on this sort of corner highlighting, so this crescent again on this round screen with just a finer amount just a bit deeper into that corner. So we're looking at very carefully into that sort of area there. Same on the more square ones where again we're just looking to pick it out a bit more towards this corner. And then finally, the last thing we need is a pure white. So here I'm using some White Star, and all we need to do is apply a dot of it in the opposite corner to where we've been applying the greens. So in this case, it's just going to be just up here, and this will give the impression of that specular light reflecting. Once that's done, the green screens are now complete, and so what we're going to do now is move on to painting some lights. And for this, what we're going to go for is red to give the appearance of like an alarm sort of thing going off. And to do this, what we need first of all is a dark red. So I'm going to use some corn red for it, sticking to that small brush, so still the size 00. And with this colour, we just got to block them in at this stage. So remember, get that paint thinned down so you got it under control and you got it ready for the base coating. And then it's just a matter of looking for all these lights. And what we want to search for is things such as this one just here. So just want to block it in entirely on the glass. Now also, if you want to, this is another great colour for dials and things, so if you want to, you can also pick out smaller details such as this one just here. With the base coat done, the next thing to do is to make those lights brighter, and for this what we'll need first of all is nice bright red. So I'm going to use some Evilson Scarlet for this, and then we'll take it into some orange. So here we're going to use some Fire Dragon Bright. But first of all, what we need is Evilson Scarlet, and to apply it, stick to your small brush, because what we want to do is to bring this towards the middle of each of these lights, leaving that darker red still visible around the outside where they meet the metal. So to do it, make sure the paint's nicely thin and under control, and then we're looking for that sort of area. So for example, with this one just here, that means applying it to this region, so we leave just a little bit of that red still showing as it gets close to the metal parts. Next up, to take things further, we need some Fire Dragon Bright, and this has been thinned down with a little bit of water, and what we want to do is to go a little bit further towards the front of each light. So we're looking at this region just around here. And there we are, the orange has been applied, and so now if you want to, what we can do is give the impression of a bit of a glow coming out from these red lights. And if you want to do this, what we'll need to do is go back to Corn Red, followed by Evilson Scarlet, and both of these are going to be glazed on. So we'll start out with Corn Red. What we want to do while I'm glazing is essentially really heavily thin the paint down, so making it quite inky really. So adding water to it to really bring it right down so it's very translucent, and then we want to thinly apply it into that area around the light where the light would be catching. So I want to get it right down to about this sort of point here, and then what we need to do, if we take a look at these bigger lights, is look at this sort of area where the light's going to be catching around it. So if we go on this side, for example, it means thinly applying it into this sort of area. So just quickly putting it on that area down there where the light would be, and then just to make sure it blends in the surroundings, just quickly wash your brush whilst it's still wet, and then just go back at it and just sort of go back and forth just to help blend that out there like that. So you get that soft red appearing just there. And basically what we need to do is this all the way around each light. So just go for one side at a time, just build that red up, and then just wash it out by, remember, just making sure you wash your brush, just make it a little bit damp, and then just sort of blend it on the side just there. Once you're happy with that red, you're then ready to move on to a brighter red. So here we've got some Evil Sun Scarlet, once again thinned down in just the same way, and what we want to do with this is apply it just a little bit closer to each of these lights. So down there, and the exact same thing as before, once you've got it on there, just wash your brush, make sure it's damp, and just use it just to blend that colour so it fades out into the surroundings. And once that's done, you can see we now got the effect of those glowing lights. And so the last thing that we're going to do now is add a bit of rust onto that metal to make it look old and worn. And for this, what we're going to need first of all is a nice brown colour. So Fang brown is what I picked out for this. And what we're going to do is start thinning it down with water to make it quite runny and quite inky, and then start putting it on, similar to the glaze that we just did, only a little bit more focused this time, a little bit heavier to make sure that we get this coloration on the metal parts. So what we need is some of that paint on the palette, and then I'm using my size 1 brush for it. What I'm going to do is really heavily thin it down to make it really quite runny. So we're looking for this kind of consistency here. And then what we need to do is start applying it over the silver metal. So for example, we've got the fan just here. All we need to do is just start running it onto flatter areas like this, just letting it fade out into the surroundings, and this way we'll start to get that rusty effect building up. Now if you want to, you can also take this a bit further on parts of metal that are around all the bluer parts of the walls. So for example, we've got this box just on here. You can add some rust onto these parts and these pipes, and if you wanted to, you can then have some of it running down and staining the walls. So for example, just drawn down areas like that, or under here, just dripping down and then streaking down the wall like this. Now when you do this, just run it down like that, and again wash your brush, make sure it's damp, and just use that just to pull it a little bit further, and this will just blend it into its surroundings. And there we are, that paint is dry, and you can see how it's nicely given the impression of rust. And you can see I've got it all across the metal, even on the top just there. And with that done, what we can do now is push it a little bit further with a brighter brown, and in this case what I'm going for is scrag brown. So quite an orangey colour this, perfect for rust. What we want to do with this is apply it in much the same sort of way, only just a little bit more precisely. So there's not quite so much as this as with the previous colour. But getting it ready is the exact same process as what we did with the previous one, just making sure again we get that really almost inky version of the paint, really heavily thinned down. And then all you got to do is just load up a small amount and just start looking for where you put the rust originally, and focus it a bit more towards recesses in the centre of areas. So for example, on the fan just here, it means we're just going to start dotting it on, retracing our steps really where that brown was originally and where it's a bit stronger, just dotting it on to get that brighter spot of rust in there like that. Now also we can paint it into recesses too, such as this one just here, again just running it around there. And again, if you want to build up that streaking running down from details, this is the ideal colour to do it with, but all you got to do this time, rather than doing the whole stretch of it, just focus it a little bit more towards the centre, so areas such as just there. Now carry on with this until you're happy with it, and once you are done, well, the wall piece is then complete. And here we have the completed spaceship corridor wall, ready to form a backdrop for a boarding action in the grimdark far future. So when it comes to painting scenery like this, something to bear in mind is that you actually get quite a bit of variety on the various pieces, but all the methods and techniques that we've shown you for painting this piece can be applied to those. They've just got details in different shapes. So have fun painting your corridor walls, and we'll see you again very soon.